Thanks for the introduction. I'm Avinandan Chakraborty and a PhD candidate in the University of New Mexico. So this is my job market paper that I'm going to present today. And I thank the Economics of Migration in a junior seminar for accepting my application to present this paper. So the title is The Impact of Return Migration on School Work Trade-Off and Labor Outcomes of Adolescents. To give a brief motivation regarding this. So return migration is an intrinsic part of the cycle of international migration and development. Now, although there is growing attention towards border protection in recent years, there is sparse research on understanding the impact of return migration on origin countries. Regarding my case, so the Mexico-US corridor represents one of the world's largest migration flows in human history. However, since 2007, the trend has reversed, with more Mexican migrants returning home than those migrating to the United States. And this is how the trend looks like. So in the y-axis, I have the Mexican-born immigrants in millions, and in the x-axis, I have the time. So as you can see that, the number of Mexican-born immigrants in the United States has increased over time. But since 2007, there is a slight decrease in the Mexican-born immigrants in the United States. So there are more return migrants than migrants in the United States. And approximately there were 1.39 million people who moved to Mexico from the US between 2005 and 10. And among them, most were Mexican-born immigrants who were living in the United States for some time and then returned to Mexico. And if we look at the number from the 2010 census, it was around 985,000. Now, if we compare this 2010 census number to the 2000 census, it was around 280,000. So there is a fourfold increase in just 10 years in the number of return migrants. Now, migration from a perspective of a developing country is a cause of concern because migration may lead to brain drain in the short term. But when migrants are returning back home, it can potentially have some brain gain effects.
Sorry, can I ask a question about precisely your definition of return migration? Because as far as I remember, your data are from Census, yes? So do you know if this person was in the US like longer, or that was just because it's always this discussion if like you have temporary migrants who are just basically going for a few months, coming back, and that's all, and they were never pretended to stay in the US longer, and then you have this ones who are like for some reasons, and there could be failure or success, they return. Are you able to identify those who are just for a very short period of time, or you just have a knowledge that at a given time they were in the US?
Yes, I'm going to define that exactly the independent variable that I have in 2 slides. But just to tell you that it was that the question was that before 2005 was anyone in the United States and came back in the period of 2005 and 10. So I don't know exactly how many years they were in the United States, but I know that they returned back from 2005 to 10. Pertaining to that, the research question that I have is, what are the effects of temporary migration experience? So temporary migration experience on the human capital and labor outcomes of adolescents. The main question is, does the return migrant in the household affect the school work trade-off and the occupational choices of adolescents? Now, when a migrant migrates, their optimal strategy is to maximize the lifetime utility. And with that, there occur 3 types of capital, mainly the human capital, financial capital, and cultural capital. Regarding human capital, there occur skills and knowledges, which is highly rewarding in the origin countries when they return back home. Financial capital, they occur savings because the wages are generally high in destination countries when migrants are migrating from a developing to a developed country. And cultural capital, they occur social norms from the destination country as well. And there is evidence in the literature regarding all these 3 capitals. With respect to human and financial capital, there is evidence of upward occupational mobility, increase in wages, increase in accumulated savings, increase in entrepreneurial activities for the return migrants when they return back home, and also the survival rate of these entrepreneurial activities increases. With regards to cultural capital, there is increase in political rights, pro-social conduct, and community involvement. increase in accountability and governance, and also both positive and negative effects on fertility, depending on the country of destination that the migrants went to. So keeping that in mind, the contribution of my paper are in two strands of literature. The first is a link between return migration and development. Regarding that, I find the effect of return migration on human capital labor outcomes of children using a micro level data. And the second is the trade-off between child labor and schooling. Now, sending a child to work in the perspective of the decision of the household, might be because that's a basic need for the household to survive. Now, while taking the decision, the child labor, sending a child to work, the cost of child labor is not taken into account because child labor may impede physical and mental development and also cause a decrease in human capital accumulation. Now, when the migrants return back home with all these accumulated savings, about occupational mobility, financial stability, this can all contribute to the development of child in the household through more investment in education and knowledge diffusion. So return migration can be a way through, a channel through which, yes.
Yeah. Do you have a? I was wondering whether you have a clear idea of the position of a return migrant in the household. Does a return migrant in the household act as household head, or just let's say a classic member of the household, maybe a child or something like that? Because it might at the end matter the ability of a return migrant to affect, let's say, educational outcome of some members of the household might also depend on features like that. Yes,
I do have that information, and I will be talking about this in the next slide. Thank you. So therefore, return migration can be a channel through which child labor can decrease in developing countries. The data that I use, the main data that I use is individual and household level data from the census. So this is the 2010 population housing census of Mexico. I have municipality characteristics from National Institute for Federalism and Municipal Development. And I also created an instrument from two data sets. One is the Urban Institute State Immigration Policy Resource, and the other is the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So census is basically, good for my type of study because it's a nationally representative sample of 2,443 Mexican municipalities, 2.9 million households, and 11 million individuals. And it also contains detailed statistics on the population's geographic and socioeconomic profile. Now, the census data is particularly important in my case because it has retrospective migration information. The sample that I use are adolescents from age 12 to 19, non-migrant Mexican-born children. I'm not taking into account any household, any children who have migrated abroad, because that might lead to biasness. Because when they return back home, maybe they have more education, or maybe they're having problem entering the education system again when they have returned back home. So I'm just taking non-migrant Mexican-born children. And my treatment group is US and return migrant households. So if any one in the household have returned in those households from USA, and the control group is non-migrant households. And in both of this treatment group and control group, I do not have any migrant in the household at present. So the basic difference between these two groups are that US return migrant households will have migration experiences, and non-migrant households will not have any migration experience in anyone in the household.
Sorry, Avinandan, can I ask a question, please? Okay.
Yeah.
Just concerning the return migration, you can have the information through the last residence, I guess, and the last residence is about the past 5 years, or you can have this information through the migration module. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
Yeah. You are using to define non-return migrants for children and return migrants for the other adult. You can have the information through the question about the last residence, or you can have the information through the migration module.
The question was actually this, that just 2 more slides and I'm coming to that question.
Okay, I'll let you come. Okay, we can talk about later. Thank you.
So the sample size is 1,291,474 individuals. There are 2 dependent variables that I use. One is the school work trade-off and the labor outcomes. So both of these dependent variables have 4 categories. Only going to school, only working, neither, and both going to school and work. And for labor outcomes, I have non-participation, self-employed, wage salaried work, and unpaid work. Now, the main independent variable is created from a question from the census, which is 5 years ago, in what state of the republic, that is, in any state in Mexico, or in which country did the person live? By this question, and this question was asked in 2010. So 5 years ago means, prior to 2005, if anyone was in a different country. From that, I create my independent variable, household with a return migrant, which is equals to 1 if there is a return migrant in the household from the United States, and 0 if there are no migrants, current migrants, or return migrants in the household.
Sorry, Avinandan.
Yes.
There's a question in the chat from Marcela Rubio asking if you can distinguish between voluntary and forced return migrants.
No, I cannot actually do that because there is no information in the census data to distinguish between voluntary and involuntary migration.
Okay,
sorry,
thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Why did you decide these 2 groups? Because like when you look at this setting, it's very natural to think that there should be a third group, which are households with currently a migrant in the US. Yes, because that would be a natural kind of comparison. Is it because of the data limitation, or there are some other reasons?
No, actually, so these return migrants had experiences prior to 2005. Now, I wanted to look at the difference between a non-migrant household in Mexico and all the migration experiences that they have gathered and they have returned to the household. Because when there is a migrant in the household, there are other factors playing into role, right? Remittances that they're receiving, or the father is not in the household, or the head of the household is not present. So that might also affect the children's education. So that's why I have just taken into consideration, to differ between them, the migratory experiences, which will affect the children's schoolwork trade-off or occupational choices.
So you are using this information also to define the children who have non-return from the US, I guess?
So all the children are non-migrants. They have never migrated. And the household is, I'm just comparing households with return migrants with non-migrant households. And both of these households contain children, non-migrants. They have never migrated.
And how could you do that? With this question, or do you have another information to know that children have never migrated in life?
So I have individual level data who have migrated, that like the question that was 5 years ago, in what state of the republic. So this question was asked to every individual in the data set. So in that way, I can know that if in the household that particular child did not migrate to some other state or some other country.
Okay.
I have individual controls, mother characteristics, household characteristics, and municipality characteristics, and also region fixed effect taken into account. So moving on to the summary statistics, I've divided the table by full sample, non-migrant household sample, return migrant household sample, and the differences of those with the T statistics. So as you can see, there are significant differences between the non-migrant households and return migrant households. And I'm not going to discuss this right now because there are selection issues going on. So moving on to the summary statistics for the independent variables, we can find that there is statistical difference between the non-migrant households and return migrant households in terms of socioeconomic characteristics. Basically, if you can look at the mother's education, so mother's education in a return migrant household, mothers in a return migrant households are less likely to have completed secondary or upper secondary education. And also return migrant households are less likely to be in an urban setting. So having these differences between the socioeconomic characteristics, a naive comparison between the return migrants and non-migrant households will give us biased estimates. So therefore, we use a control function approach, basically instrumental variable approach. The main problem, doing an OLS model is that endogeneity, and there can be two problems. The first is omitted variable bias because of unobserved heterogeneity or reverse causality. Omitted variable bias might arise if some unobserved variables are affecting both the decision of return migration and also child to drop out of school. And reverse causality might happen that because the child is dropping out of school, the person is returning back home. So to control for this, we create an instrument. And the instrument that we create is immigration enforcement exposure. Now, this is a shift instrument, which is a weighted average of a common set of shocks with weights reflecting heterogeneous exposure shares. Now, this instrument has two components. The first is a synthesized policy score for each state in the United States. And the next is the share of migrants from each municipality in Mexico living across the US states. Now, to define each component, and also I create the instrument by multiplying these two components here. So the first is the synthesized policy score. I create this score by 4 policy measures, the E287 agreement, Security Communities Program, and E-Verify mandate. And this is just the average of all the policy scores. So all the policy scores are from 0 to, lies from 0 to 1 for each state in the United States. From the year 5 to 10. So synthesized policy score is just the average of these 4 policies. And to create the share of migrants from each municipality in Mexico living across the United States, I use the data from the Mexican Consular Identification Cards, which gives me the municipality of birth in Mexico and the state of residence in the United States. So suppose there is a municipality 1 in Mexico, and the shares are 0.5 to New Mexico, where I live, 0.2 to Texas, and 0.3 to Colorado. So these are all 3 states, and these are the shares. And also there is also second municipality where the shares are like this. Now, I create the instrument by multiplying these shares with the synthesized policy scores that I got by averaging the policy scores that I had shown earlier. And these are the scores that I get. When I add these scores, I get my instrument in immigration enforcement exposure. And this is how I create my instrument. Now, the immigration enforcement exposure lies from 0 to 1, 1 being high exposure of Mexican municipalities, 2 years immigration enforcement. And the idea behind this immigration enforcement exposure is that this captures each Mexican municipality's exposure to interior enforcement in the United States. So is the instrument valid? Now, for the validity of the instrument, it should satisfy 2 conditions. The first is relevance condition, and the next is exclusion restriction. So the relevance condition is that the IB must be a strong predictor of return migration in the household. This we can verify from the chi-square obtained from the first stage. Chi-square because this is a nonlinear setting. And for the exclusion restriction, which is that IB must be uncorrelated with unobservable factors affecting the outcomes, we do several robustness checks, and we also check for the validity. Now, some potential threats that can arise because of the use of this instrument. One is my identification strategy relies on municipality level variation in exposure to US entry enforcement. So that might lead to some potential problems. The first is, households were sought into municipalities with favorable labor market conditions and social infrastructure. Now, that seems not to be a problem in my case because only 4.39% of children lived in a different municipality 5 years ago. So there was not so much of sorting of households. The next problem can arise because of probability of return migration in household is non-random and may be correlated with local child labor conditions. So to control for this, we take a lot of municipality level controls. The next potential threat that can arise is because of the instrument itself. So my instrument relies on exogenous shocks, and there has been a recent growing literature on the shift instruments and the problems with that. So Borjak, Hull, and Jarvel, the 2018 paper states that the shift instrument is valid if condition on the shares, the set of shocks is as good as randomly assigned. Now, in my case, it may be a problem because the randomness assumption could fail if the enforcement intensity across US states is correlated with the municipality characteristics. Now, suppose the states in the United States where the share of migrants are more, they are implementing, higher enforcement. So that might cause a problem. To check for that, I do a shock test. In this shock test, I regress my municipality characteristics on the enforcement, and I see that the municipality characteristics are not affecting the interior enforcement or increase in the policies that were created. The next problem that might arise is because of the geographic pattern in the municipality level exposure to US immigration enforcement. If we look at our instrument and its distribution across the municipalities in Mexico, we'll find that towards the northwest state and the border states, the scores of the instruments are higher. Now, to control for that, I omit the northwest states and also the border states to check if my results are robust. And we will be discussing these results in my next slide. So the main empirical strategy that I use is a control function approach, which is because of a nonlinear setting. And in a nonlinear setting, control function approach gives unbiased estimates, consistent estimates. And the basic idea of control function approach is that the first stage residuals are taken as a control in the second stage. In the first stage, I use a Logit model, and the second stage, I use a multinomial Logit model. And my main independent variable is return migration. So moving on to the first stage results, I find that with more exposure to interior enforcement, there are more return migrants in households in those municipalities. And I have divided this table by panel A for the school work status sample and panel B by selection to employment ties. This I have done because the number of observations differs slightly for both the samples, for both the dependent variables. I've divided this table by full sample, the male sample and the female sample and the male sample. And for all these samples, my chi-squares are greater than 10, which suggests the relevance condition is satisfied. Now, moving on to the main results in the second stage, I find that having a return migrant in the household increases the probability of school attendance for a child in the household by 25.4 percentage points, decreases the probability of going to work by 9.8 percentage points, and doing both activities by 11.5 percentage points. And the magnitudes are greater for males compared to females. Moving on to the results for occupational choices, I find that having a return migrant in the household increases the probability of non-participation by 26.7 percentage points, increase in self-employment, which is an interesting result that I will be discussing later, by 5.2 percentage points, the wage salaried by 25.3 percentage points, and unpaid work by 6.6 percentage points. Again, the results are greater in magnitudes for male population compared to female population. Now, one general concession is that unpaid work is supposed to be non-participation in some cases, but unpaid work in the household. Now, from the data that I have, I'm unable to classify if the unpaid work is in the household or outside of the household. So therefore, I just do a robustness check by putting the unpaid work in non-participation. I see my results are robust. And also, there is a detailed characteristics of the occupational choices, where Census has divided the self-employed into two parts and wage salaried into another two parts. And the results are like this. So we find that there is so in the labor outcomes, we find that self-employed is increased by 5.2 percentage points. Now, if we look at the detailed statistics, we will find that working on own account has increased rather than being an employer themselves. And if we again look at the wage salaried worker, which has decreased by 25.3 percentage points, we'll find that being a day laborer has increased more than being a white or blue collar worker. And day labor is generally for children considered hazardous which may impede their human capital accumulation. The next thing that I've done is
sorry, Avinandan, before you go forward, I wanted to ask you a question. So basically, in your second stage, you're treating the choice between school and work, and then the choice of the type of work as two distinct kind of behaviors, right? And I was wondering if you have considered, maybe you did it in the robustness, to do a nested Logit model where you nest the type of employment in the work and in the both study and work, because the trade-off between study and work might be, I guess, affected by the kind of work that you're gonna end up in. So I mean, I don't know if you have considered this, if you have tried it or something like that.
No, I have not considered. That's an interesting suggestion. I can look into it and we can discuss this later. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
So the next thing is heterogeneous effects by age, and which I multiplied my age independent variable with the main independent variable that I have, return migration household. And this is how the result looks like. So my effects are greater in magnitudes as you move towards older adolescents. This might be the case because the transition from school to work happens after a certain age, maybe after 15 or 16. So that's why having a return migrant in the household has greater effects for older adolescents compared to younger adolescents. And as we can find that school attendance is increasing and the probability of going to work is decreasing, and the magnitudes are more, when you move towards the older adolescents. I've also divided my results by male and female sample. The dotted lines are for male sample and the solid lines are for female sample. Again, the results are greater in magnitude for male samples compared to female samples, and also the magnitudes are greater as you move towards older adolescents. So there is increase in school attendance, decrease in work. Neither is decreasing at till 16, and then it becomes insignificant. And also for doing both activities, there is a slight decrease for male sample, but no significant difference for female samples. For results with occupation, yes.
Sorry, do you have any information on the school attendance around age 18, 19? At that age, I guess that would be like tertiary or post-secondary education. Do you have any information on what kind of education they're going to enroll into?
Yes, I actually have that information. And I'm also doing another paper on that, particularly, what type of education that they're doing.
Okay, that would be very interesting to hear about. Thanks.
So moving on to the results for occupational choices, we find that again, the results are greater in magnitude for as you move towards the older adolescents. And we find that self-employment is increasing. Again, interesting result. I will be discussing that later. And wage salary is decreasing. Again, I divided by the male and female samples. The solid lines are for females and the dotted lines are for the males. Greater in magnitude for the males compared to the female samples. I also do heterogeneous effect by wealth. So I create a wealth index, which is one of my independent variable. I interact this variable with the main independent variable that I have is return migration. And this is the average marginal effect shown in the figures. So the interesting thing is that the results are greater or higher in magnitudes for the lower ends of wealth index, that is for the poor, poorer households. So having a return migrant in the household has greater effects for poorer people compared to the wealth index, higher or rich people. So the probability of going to school increases and going to work decreases. These are the two main results in here. I divide the results by males and female samples, and the results are still significant and higher in magnitudes for the poorer households. For occupational choice, again, the results are higher in magnitude for the lower ends of the wealth index. There is decrease in wage salaried worker, increase in self-employed, and unpaid and non-paid participation is not significant. I divide the results by male and female samples. The interesting thing is that again, for the male sample, the results are greater higher in magnitude compared to the female samples. So I do also do some robustness checks to check the validity of my results. The first one is omitting urban population. The reason that I do, I omit urban population is that there may be, so in the literature, there is evidence that rural children work more compared to urban children. And also domestic work, or in my case, unpaid work is more in magnitude, higher in magnitude for rural children compared to urban children. So I omit the urban population to check if my results still hold for just the rural population as well. The next robustness check I do is without high migration states. So one caveat in my paper is that I'm unable to account for the migratory networks, which seems to be significant in Mexico. There is one paper by Kevin Mushin, it's 2003 migratory networks paper, that there are 8 states that are characterized by agricultural manual labor. Now, having migratory networks more in those states means that the people who are returning back home are low skilled, who will have lower levels of human capital accumulation and lower savings. So to account for the potential biasness arising due to these reasons, I omit the high migration states and find my results are robust. The next thing that I do is without domestic return migrants. So in the households that I'm considering, there are both international return migrants as well as domestic return migrants. Now, it might happen that domestic return migrants are also accumulating savings or all the human capital accumulations that they have abroad. The only difference is that domestic return migrants may return back to the households frequently compared to international migrants. So just to check if my results are robust to those, I omit the domestic return migrants and I find the results are robust. And this is how the table looks like. So the first 3 columns are for rural population. The next 3 are for without a high migration states, and the next 3 are for without domestic return migration states. So still we find that there is increase in school attendance, decrease in work, a decrease in neither, and decrease in both. And it follows without high migration states and without for domestic return migration states. One result to interpret with caution, because the chi-squares are less than 10. This is for the male sample for without domestic return migration households.
Sorry, Avinandan.
Yes.
We have a question from Laura Munoz Blanco asking if you have some information about the intensity of the treatment, so the policy in the US states. So if you have information about this intensity and if you explore some sort of heterogeneity effects.
Intensity in the sense of how many policies they have in effect?
I guess, yeah.
So actually, this is an average of from 2005 to 10. And as the return migrants are from 2005 to 10, it's not possible for me to check exactly when the return migrant returned. So that's why I'm taking the average of those policies.
Okay, thanks.
Again, my results are robust for occupational choices for all the 3 samples that I've used. As in the previous slides, I had shown, while checking the validity of instrument, that my results are robust without the Northwest states and without the border states. Because my instrument had greater, scores towards the Northwest and border states, so I omit those states to check if my results are still robust. I do some sensitivity analysis because I define my adolescents from age 12 to 19. So I check if my results are sensitive to that definition. So what I do is I just check my results from 12 to 18 by defining the adolescents from 12 to 18. And I have also divided my results by 12 to 15 and 16 to 19. This is basically because 16 to 19 is the time when children are transitioning from school to work. So it is supposed to happen that if there is a return migrant household and that is affecting their schoolwork or occupational choices, the coefficients will be greater in magnitude for 16 to 19 compared to 12 to 15.
Right, yeah. And then you have 5 minutes left.
Yes. And so I find that my results are still robust for 12 to 18, 12 to 15, and 16 to 19, and higher in magnitudes for the age group 16 to 19. And same for occupational choices as well. So some potential mechanisms. One caveat of my paper is that I'm unable to do a causal mediation analysis because of the data that I have. However, with the evidence from the literature that we have seen that return migrants accumulate savings of financial capital. They have an increase in wages when they return back home. There is upward occupational mobility, and both this wage increase and occupational mobility might lead to increase in income. And all of these three combined might relax the credit constraints in the household, pulling children out of labor force and investing in more in human capital accumulation of those children. We also find greater effects at the ends of wealth distribution. Now, there might be two reasons. The first one is return migration presence may relax the income constraints and more than compensates for the drop in remittances because they have returned back home and there is no remittances being sent in the household. The one interesting result that we found is that increase in self-employment. Now, although there is decrease in the other types of work, wage, salaried or unpaid work, and increase in non-participation, we find that there is increase in self-employment. The reason being that there is, for the returnees in the household, there is upward occupational mobility. And adolescents are supposed to be self-employed because maybe the people who are returning back home are investing in this in the entrepreneurial activities, and rather than being in wage salary jobs. And also when we looked at the detailed occupational choices, we found that there is greater decrease in the probability of working as day laborers, which is supposed to be hazardous for children. And with regards to social norms, there is evidence in the literature that, as we found that there, when the return migrants return back home, there is increase or decrease in fertility rates. And also, in some places, there is a general consensus that mothers are taking the children to work, and some of these works may be hazardous. So when the return migrant is returning back home with all these experiences and the social norms gathered, that might cause the decrease in the child labor and in improvement of the human capital accumulation. So to conclude, this paper explores the causal relationship between return migration and children's schoolwork trade-off and occupational choices. The stream of migrants returning to the hometowns in Mexico have contributed to increase in school attendance, decrease in work, and decrease in both activities, increase in non-participation, increase in self-employment, decrease in wage-side work, and decrease in unpaid work. Another limitation of my study is that I'm unable to disentangle the effects of decrease in remittances and increase in savings. So I do not have the exact amount of savings that they have gathered during their stay in the United States. So I cannot particularly say if my results are due to the increasing remittances, increasing savings, sorry. So return migration from a developed to a developing country is a mechanism through which migrant flows may, or benefit origin developing countries worldwide. And policies aimed at assisting the reintegration in local labor markets and also employing the capital accumulated abroad may benefit or decrease child labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Avinandan, for this very interesting presentation. So now we will start the Q&A session, and there is a question by Martin. So I will ask for him. So basically saying that ideally we would like to compare two migrants who were equally successful in the destination labor market, and one of them returns and not the other one. And so how does the enforcement affect the labor market integration of migrants?
Which question was that?
So it was more a comment, I think, than a question. So it was about, it would be maybe more ideal to compare migrants who are successful in the destination labor market. And so one returns in Mexico and not the other one. And so it would allow to see how the enforcement affect the labor market integration of migrants.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So in this paper, I just trying to find that just because of the migration experience, how is it affecting the households in Mexico? So that's why I'm comparing the return migrant households with migration experiences with all those accumulated savings and financial stability. compared to a non-migrant household in Mexico.
Okay, so we have a question from Giuseppe and Jacek. So I think Giuseppe was first. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so I have two remarks / questions. So one of your findings is that although the probability to work for adolescents in returnee households is falling, conditional on working, you have an increase in self-employment. So I was wondering, I don't know about the institutions in Mexico, but I mean, to my knowledge, like self-employment tends to be a bit more risky because your income is unstable. I don't know what are the possibility to succeed in having a business in Mexico. So assuming that these returnees coming back, they bring their knowledge, then they're sort of pushing their, I don't know, their little brothers to be self-employed. And then connected to this, I don't really understand how this can happen in the lower part of the distribution of wealth, because you would expect those households to undertake less risk, and maybe like you would find the effect more on the upper side of the distribution. So how do you reconcile these two things?
Yes, that's a great question. One thing that I can do is I can just I can divide my results by lower part of the wealth index and higher part of the wealth index, and find that if my results are still the same, the increase in self-employment is if it is coming from the lower part of the wealth index. But the main thing is that with the accumulated savings, even for the poorer households, it might happen that they're investing in small entrepreneurial activities, maybe a shop, just beside their household. Maybe that might happen, but I'm not exactly sure what type of entrepreneurial activities or how big that entrepreneurial activity is. That's one problem, but it might happen that they're opening a small shop beside their home.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Jacek, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very, very nice paper. Can I ask you to go back one slide to your conclusion, because I have yes. So I mean here when it comes, I mean that part of the discussion is that that there is some effect when it comes to the fact that like the transfers, that they are like, this is the end, so the household was probably getting some transfers in the past, it's not getting these transfers anymore, and but on the other hand, maybe this person brought some savings, yes, so maybe it's making it more stable. But I a little bit don't see how you put I mean because your comparison group is in this case households which never were exposed to at least not in the last period to migration, yes. Mm-hmm. So I mean I don't know, I'm a little bit lost at this point, like if you could explain more a little bit about this particular mechanism which you mentioned.
The mechanism of savings? Yes.
In the sense that like what like okay, so your point is that it's you don't know if they are better off because of savings, yes? That's you cannot find.
So the thing is that they're accumulating all this capital and savings. Now I do not have the data for exact savings that they're accumulating. I'm just assuming that, as evidenced by the literature, that return migrants accumulate savings, and they also have, about occupational mobility, increasing wages when they return back home. That might be causing the increasing, investment in children's education and pulling children out of work. That might be one of the cases, but the limitation is that I cannot do a causal mediation analysis to state that exactly that this is the reason that children are going more to school compared to non-migrant households.
Okay.
Does that answer my question?
Yes, yes. So my second question is, I know that you focus on schooling, but did you look also at the outcomes of, for example, enrollment to universities? Because that would be also kind of like for me natural bias, because you look for 19 years old, so that's also the time of making this kind of decision.
Yes, I have taken that into consideration, and I'm doing the paper on just what type of education that they're going into when there's return migrant in the household.
Okay, so you look at the future. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Elsa, if you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Avinandan, for your presentation. I just come back to this measure of children that have never migrated, because to my understanding, you are using the last residence in order to say that those children did not live in the United States 5 years ago. Yes. Knowing that the youngest is 12, maybe you could have some children in primary school in the US. And knowing that concerning return migration, the children might return first before the parents. Even if you have a residence in Mexico for the children 5 years ago, does not mean that the children never lived in the US before. And also you are concerned about household, for your control group, it's household without any current migrant and any return migrant, that's it. So I do think that concerning current migrant, you are using the migration module in order to see if the household has a former household member that are living in the United States since the 5 past year. But to my understanding, and after the paper that I wrote with Simone and Elie Murad, our understanding is that this module does not include all the current migrants that are linking to this household. So I was a little bit surprised to not see some analyses, including remittances that could be a proxy of having somebody else in the US at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah.
So for the first question, so I'm looking at adolescents from 6 to 18. So if you're age 16 in 2010, and if you're asked that 5 years ago in what state of the republic or country you are living in, might be that a child is not answering that question, even though he or she will be 1 year 5 years ago. So even if they were staying in a different country, that would have taken into account in this question. And regarding the next question, can you repeat the next question, Elizabeth?
Yeah, it's about your control group and having no current migrant at all. If you measure no current migrant with the migration module, you could miss some current migrants that are actually linked to your household, but not declared because they were moving from another household to the United States, even if they are really close from people in your household.
Yes, so thanks for the question. This is actually one thing I didn't discuss. So there is one supplemental data set in the census, which states that is there any current migrant in the household between the period 2005 and 10, from where I can know that if the household has a migrant. And that's how I omit the households with migrants, current migrants. So basically the comparison group is households without any migration experience, current or previous, past, any time. And return migrant is just return migration who were in a different country before 2005 and return between the period of 2005 and 10. Now, taking into consideration the migration experience, like current migration experience, in the census data, I do not have any information on remittances. However, as you said, clearly said that I can proxy that for migration, current migration. I can check for the remittances. But in my case, I wanted to compare households with all the migration experience who have returned back home and staying with the child currently, compared to non-migrant households who are also in the same setting, except that they have no migration experience. Because there is evidence in the literature that if there is a father migrant or someone in the household has migrated, it can affect the children's education. It can decrease the children's education because of the absence of the parent. So having both the parents in the household, that is main thing for return migrant households and non-migrant households as well. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, or we can discuss it?
Provide some information, thank you. But just jumping on your last sentence, saying that having a return migrants can have positive effect on education of the children that are living with these return migrants. Did you explore a little bit the link with the return migrants and the children concerned? Because I guess if it's my close parents, like my father or my mother who is coming back, it will have more influence on me than my cousin or somebody else.
Yes, I can do that. I had seen the results, and the problem is that if I include just the parent, suppose the father who is returning or the head of the household who is returning, I cannot omit the households with migrants, because I cannot specifically say that if the father in the household is a current migrant, because the supplemental data set does not have exactly that information to link the father, if the father or the head of the household is a migrant. So as my main concern was to check that, to compare return migrant households to non-migrant households, having someone, at least someone in the household who is a return migrant, I was unable to do that exactly, who is the return migrant.
Okay, and just a little point on your controls, because I see that you are controlling for mother education, for mother age. So does that mean that your sample of children is only restricting to those who are co-residing with their mother? Yes. Is that the presence of the mother into the household mandatory to be in your sample?
Yes. So the sample is, the households containing all the, both father and mother.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, I let the floor to other questions. Thanks.
Okay, now there is another question from Martin. Sorry. So basically, he's wondering if there could be some spillover effects, because if a lot of people come back to the municipality in Mexico, maybe it makes a big change in the labor market on this municipality, and so it could affect the educational attainment for their family members, but also for children in other families. So I don't know if you studied that.
That's a great question about spillover effect. I haven't thought about the spillover effects to the non-migrant households. I was just looking at comparing non-migrant households to return migrant households, but having a return migrant in the community and the effect that will have on children in the non-migrant households, there might be some effect, but there is no way to control for that right now. Like I cannot think of any answer right now, but that's a great question. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I don't see any other question. So maybe we can just conclude for this seminar. And if some people are interested in discussing more about that, they can just stay after Elsa concludes the seminar.